Why we ride.
It's to feel free.
This is what every biker will tell you, in some way, shape or form.
And this is true. It is freedom to ride a bike.
It's not about speed. It's about adventure.
Having a small vehicle and going to all sorts of places. Or having a pack of you riding through the town. Loud exhausts and shiny chrome. Heads turning either in disgust or admiration. But both gave us a buzz. Well, it did for me. I was happy being a misfit, an outcast of society, unaccepted. These traits are something I used to feel ashamed of. But becoming a biker, they were traits I began to love. My journey of biking is probably very different from your extremely 99%. I say extremely 99%. Because the majority of bikers today are not bikers in my mind. Well, at least not traditional anyway. I went to bike nights, and I see people's comparing how protective their astronaut suits were.
And those same people would lecture me for not wearing a proper protective jacket. My reaction would be to laugh at them and call them the extreme 99%. This was in relation to the 1% bikers and 99% bikers. But sometimes you just had really 99%. I don't want the reader, or in this case the listener, to get confused in any way. I was never a 1% biker. That is a whole separate category, and one I feel I am not qualified to talk on. I was what you call a rebellious biker.
Parties, rides, rugs, and mischief was the main buzz for us. I say rugs because I don't want the video to get blocked.
To me, bikes were everything, and all I wanted to do was have a good time, inspired by films such as The Wild One, Wild Angels, and Easy Rider. It seemed like I was trying to live out the films in real life, and was fairly successful at it too for a short time. But ultimately, I nearly ended up screwing my own life up.
I was constantly wanting to have a good time. I forgot about important things.
Such as family. I can't believe I actually did this, but I did. And that was turn my back on my own mother. The very woman who cared for me so much throughout my life. I turned my back on her and the rest of my family. At the start of me jumping into the biker world, my mother told me stories about her days of being a biker, and I loved hearing them. But as I started to fall into the darker aspects of being a biker, I soon became very distant with my mother.
Till one evening, my mother and I argued, and I stormed out. I loaded my bike with the bare essentials and rode off into the frosty night. As I rode, I noticed frost forming on my gloves.
I stopped in a lay-by a few miles from my home. I had nowhere to go, so I pulled up my phone and called one of my biker brothers and asked him if he could put me up for a bit. He jumped to support me, and I stayed at his place for 3 months.
During that time, I was still working and riding 30 miles to work each day. In the blistering cold, we partied a lot at that place, and went round our friends' family's house to have dinner there fairly often, as they only lived round the corner.
Sometimes when I was alone in the flat, I would gaze over the woodlands bordering the town, and reflect on my days growing up in the village.
I grew up in a small village community, even went to the village school. So you can imagine everyone knew everyone.
When I was growing up, I developed a love for making films.
They were my pride and joy, especially my Western films. One night, my biker brother had caught wind that I used to make films and found them on YouTube, and him and the rest of the group at that time laughed at me. After this happened, I hid the account so that the videos could never be accessed again.
For the first time, I felt shame about my work. Also growing up, I had a childhood friend, Archie. Him and I used to write films together and make the most epic adventures. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't even have a YouTube, as he encouraged me to create one. Before I used to make films and then show them to him, but they never left my computer at home until the YouTube was made. Then the rest is history, and I'm happy to say that all videos are now back up for everyone to see and access to their heart's content. The woodlands reminded me of all this, as most of my time was spent as a child playing in the woods and as a teenager creating the most epic movies in the woodlands. For the first time, I questioned whether I was on the right path in life, and whether I had made the right choice. During this time, I was in conversation with Tasha, a girl I had liked ever since I was a teenager, but she never liked me back, so it was one of them. I didn't expect that one day she was gonna like me back, but she did. And we ended up getting together, and still are together as to this day. During all of this, I was associated with a motorcycle club that was a big part of this period of my life. But out of respect for the club, I won't talk about them or anything I did with them. But for a very short while, I was a president of a MCC support chapter for the club. I was deep in politics now,
and that world was extremely different than what I was used to. And to have a big responsibility as a president, it was heavy stuff. The brother who put me up had decided that he was gonna move out, and this left me with nowhere to go, and Tasha and myself were still in our early stages. So I guess you could say she was prospecting me still, so I hadn't met her family at this time, and she was living with them. So moving in with her was out of the question. But the girl who was living in the flat downstairs to us decided to give me a room at her place. Honestly, let me tell you, she was a nightmare to live with, and she had me on edge all the time. On random occasions, she would get really mad at me for no apparent reason. One time she got mad at me because I made a bacon sandwich. I brought the bacon, the bread and butter, and I also cleaned up after myself. But in her mind, I was taking the piss. As she was the only roof over my head, I started to seriously worry whether one day I would find my stuff in bin bags outside her door. Thankfully, that never happened. Instead, she gave me some bullshit about the landlord wanting me out. In other words, fuck of Josh. As fate would have it, I had been in conversation with my mother for some time, and when I told her about my current circumstances, she took me back with open arms, but was still skeptic because of all the club stuff. But nevertheless, it was like the prodigal son from the Bible story. The support chapter took up so much of my time that I could see I was starting to lose Tasha, and I didn't want that to happen. Plus, some other stuff happened too, so I ended up jacking in the support chapter but remained close to the main club. I made these friendship groups that ultimately ended in arguments, even added my good pal Archie into them too, but he was persistent in nitpicking me all the time, and that made me begin to dislike him. He was so opinionated on my life, but he didn't understand me. I don't think anyone fully does. I was so desperate to keep that rebellious nature going, the parties, the riding, even still keeping the swastika flag I had, not as a Nazi symbol, but as a fuck you symbol to the world. That was how I used it anyway. Anyone that got offended by it, I just considered them extremely 99%. This of course made Archie extremely 99%, as he would despise me for having it, and would keep telling me how much he hated it and disagreed with a lot of my approach towards life. What kick-started my rebellion off was of course a girl who I was with for 4 long years. I helped her out of a difficult situation, and paid her way a lot of the time. I even paid off a loan that she got out, even after she attempted to get a loan out in mine and my mother's name. I kept optimistic about the relationship though, keeping the hope that she would change, but it only got worse, and I started to think that she was cheating on me. She made me feel insane for thinking that, but one day those fears became reality, and she cheated on me with my good friend at the time. I can't say I was hurt by her actions so much. I think I knew it was coming. But doing this with Connor, my good friend at the time, right out set the seed for anger that infested me, and ultimately changed my perspective on life. And here Archie was judging me. The hell is wrong with this guy? The lack of understanding right out enraged me. I guess it's hard for the listener to understand. You really have to walk a mile in someone's shoes to fully get them, and no one is willing to wear my shoes, so ultimately no one understands me fully. My reaction to his lack of understanding was to throw a seed hell in front of him. The bitterness he felt when I did that is the bitterness I feel around people that don't understand. I made all these friendship groups in an attempt to recreate the group I had in the previous year, the misfits, the rebels, but it was no good. The people I had around me just were not rebels in any way, and this led to me becoming the black sheep of them all. I think that some of them pretended to be rebels for my benefit, but it was all just a show, and I wasn't willing to be part of some circus act. I could see one guy in particular wanted me out of the group and began to spread lies about me among the group, eventually kicking me out. I despised him for that, and even when I went to make stuff up with him, he even lied about what happened that day, saying I threatened his family with a knife, and that just wasn't true at all. I conceived a plan with the brother at the time to jump him, but I jumped out last minute. The brother called me a pussy for doing so, but I'm glad I did now. What we had planned wasn't pretty. A year later, I ended up meeting with an elderly chap I'll call G. At the start G seemed okay, an old school biker, and we hung and rode for a while. But later on, he got the rest of the group to start disrespecting me. And I guess he got a kick out of seeing my eyes filled with fire. A fire that would burn bright at times. During this time, Tasha and myself had moved in a trailer together on a traveler's site, and are still living happily there to this day. I was riding a good 20 miles to meet up with the group, and they often didn't want to ride out this way. We've been here a year, and I think Archie has been up here 4 times in total. He said he would be more inclined to ride with me if I had a bigger bike. So now I was outcast from the outcast, emperor of all misfits, and I hated that. I didn't understand why I was the one being pecked on all the time. Why I was now some kind of freak show for everyone. This filled me with rage and longing for respect. That's why when I had an offer to patch up with the club, I took it, and again found myself in that world. And Archie turned his back on me fully, not wanting to understand me first of all, and now just turning his back on me. My attitude towards him changed. He eventually let the sleeping dogs lie, but ultimately I'll never forget that. This book is raw and real emotion, and I won't beat about the bush on how things made me feel. I know that I have touched on Archie a lot, but what the listener must understand is that this was a guy who I grew up with and loved dearly. He accepted me for me when we were younger, riding our push bikes, playing cards in the rims to make them sound like bikes. He was a brother, but now his mannerisms have changed, and him and I have become different people. And at the time I wasn't willing to accept that, still clinging on to the good old days. Archie has always been in my life, and I guess it was hard to see that he wasn't the same accepting Archie he used to be. Plus, he was always there for me during the bad time with my ex. Again, I won't talk too much about the club stuff, as I don't want to be disrespectful to them, hence why I have not mentioned their name, or any of the other events that happened with them. This does make the book a hard one to write, as the club was big in my life for years, and was one of the biggest influences in my life. I would listen to their music almost every day, and keep in contact with them even when I wasn't patched up. I wasn't in the club for very long this time. I was dedicated to them, but I guess the club world isn't for me. I knew my family would not best please me being in the club, and I didn't want to be distant with them. Not again. I made that mistake once before. I was also starting to see my friends drop off one by one, and I could see I was starting to lose it. So I went to the leader man to man, and told him why I had to go, and he was very understanding about it, more than I imagined he would be. So they closed the chapter of my life to do with the club world, and I was starting to want to go back to my old ways a bit, making the movies and doing a hard week's graft. The rebellious Josh was starting to fade away. I think he faded away when I developed extreme anxiety and depression. In 2022, I had overwhelming symptoms of anxiety. I often thought I had something very wrong with me medically, and would get myself into a state of panic real quick. I had faced off with people before, and didn't have much in the way of crazy fear, but this was the first time. I was genuinely terrified of something that wasn't even there. I began to question my sanity, and sought professional help. I managed to get a therapist after almost 8 months of waiting for one. In the end, I think this came around after an involuntary out-of-body experience I had when I accidentally smoked wacky vape that got me tripping balls. I thought it was ordinary vape juice, but it turns out I made a critical error on that one, and because I didn't know I have taken it, I was sent a trip that gave me PTSD. And I guess all those demons I had gathered over the last 2 years came crashing out, and I was forced to face them head on. At that moment, I became more and more fragile, and I hated that because I knew that fragile people get eaten up by stronger people, and I didn't want to be prey. I was offered medicine for this, but I ultimately refused it. I was determined to do this the natural long way, but all the while I was telling myself it'll be gone tomorrow. Needless to say, I was very upset when I woke up the next morning, and it remained. I would get the constant states of dizziness, tiredness, racing heart, depersonalization. Depersonalization was probably one of the scariest symptoms, as it was kind of like the trip I had. So I was stuck in a never-ending cycle of worry and fear. I hated it, and still tried to ignore it and carry on with what I was doing. But it was no good. Eventually, I had to change my ways. But ultimately through this, I became close to God. In recent days, I became even closer to God, asking Him for guidance. And needless to say, He did answer me. And I'm happy to say that as time goes on, I am becoming increasingly better. I understand that I had to go through this hurt and pain to make me a stronger man. I understand now that being a strong man doesn't mean that you kick in heads 24/7, but it means that you carry on going even when you think you can't. It's being strong enough to make a change when it's necessary to. I recently had a good friend of mine come down from Liverpool, James. He made the 3-hour journey down here specifically to see me and spend time with me. To me, that is a solid brother. He spent the whole weekend here with me, and we rode out to some local places to show him the local sights.
While we were riding, he told me to take it easy when I ride. I go too fast everywhere, and there is no need to. This made me think.
I do go too fast on the bike, and when I went slow, I realized that I saw things I didn't even see before. So this made me go slower, not just on the bike, but in life also.
I went slower when editing a movie, making sure to get every last bit of passion in. I went slower when drinking a pint of beer, appreciating its flavor. I went slower when smoking a cigar, again to appreciate the oaky flavor it gives off.
You could say I cracked life up to the top gear and eased of the reds, and now I cruise through life, appreciating all its aspects now. When watching Easy Rider for the second time, I understood it. I understood that they were looking for freedom, but never found it. Understanding that freedom is not something you can find on the side of the road or in a motorcycle, but it's a state of mind. I was so focused on rebellion, parties, and attitude that ultimately I was sabotaging myself and causing myself to miss out on the key elements of riding, to let it all go, let go of the past, and let go of the pain. Neither of these things I did.
Now, I like to think of myself as an easy rider. In fact, James and myself have planned a trip on the bikes, to go on an easy rider's ride, to have an adventure, and to truly appreciate the landscape around us. I still have the swastika flag deep in the closet, and I sometimes look at it and remember those days gone by. Sometimes I miss it, and other times I'm glad it's gone.
I truly love the life that Tasha and myself have made and wouldn't trade it for the world.
I love my stable home now. I love our little Budgie and our dog Toby. I love my future wife to pieces, and truly appreciate just how patient she has been with me during all of this, and how she has stuck by my side.
I don't think James knew what he did that day, but it's like he unknowingly threw me a key for my chains, and I broke free. But my journey is far from over. I'm 27 years old, and no doubt there will be something else to write later down the line.
Things have changed for the better.
I ring my mother up on occasions and chat to her for hours, as I do my sister Rachel. I'm so very glad I maintained a good relationship with them. I love them to pieces. Also, my father is beginning to talk to me again. I never had a great relationship with him, and I thought that it was set for life. But I guess it goes back to that same old saying, never say never.
No doubt I'll put pen to paper and write about my easy rider's ride and describe what happens then.
And I guess that concludes this 20-minute audiobook.
I hope you enjoyed it.
And I hope the AI was easy to understand for you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content. God bless you all, and I wish you all the best of health.